You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
What's going on, Los Angeles? Welcome to the LA Football Show here on the LA Football Network, live on the Mightier 1090 ESPN Radio. It is a beautiful Friday in the Southland. Thank you all for tuning in and making us a part of your day. I'm your co-host, Ryan Dyer, joined as always by the madman, Jamal. What's up, brother? Welcome home. I know you were traveling a bit, so welcome back to beautiful, finally sunny Los Angeles.
Yes, no, thanks so much, Ryan. Excited to be home and ready to celebrate a wonderful weekend here in LA, obviously with you and your beautiful family. You know, your little girl's birthday party is Saturday, so we're really excited to be there for that, and just thrilled to be back in LA after a couple days in Houston. It was a lot of fun actually in Houston. Got a chance to meet some astronauts and talk some space stuff. Given the day job, but excited to be home and ready to talk LA football.
Yeah, how's the weather in Houston? Was it warmer than here?
It's muggy. I mean, Houston is muggy, and we were sort of talking to some folks, and they were like, "Yeah, no, it's definitely air conditioning most of the year is necessary. It gets over 100, and then when you throw in the humidity in there, I mean, it's a you're living in a sauna."
Yeah, I know. I've been to Texas a couple times, and just anywhere in the South, the humidity is wild compared to here. And we have humidity more than, some other states, but definitely nothing even close to that. But no, good to have you back. Yeah, my daughter turned 3 on Wednesday. Cannot wait to celebrate with everyone on Saturday. Can't be more thrilled that you and the wife are coming, and it's going to be a good time. Her middle name is Ray, and the rays of sunshine have finally come out just for the birthday. So, but I was thinking the other day, Jamal, what's crazy is, so she turned 3, and anyone that's a parent knows, like, it just flies by your kid's age. So when she was, not to rehash everything, but she was born essentially a week after lockdown started, I think. I think it was like March 21st when the lockdowns officially kind of started, or at least maybe that was when hospitals started allowing only one or something like that. It was right around that time anyway. So I was just thinking on Wednesday, I'm like, I don't know what's crazy, the fact that my daughter's already 3 or the fact that we are 3 years removed from the world shutting down. Like, it's been 3 years already. We still have these conversations. We're not obviously getting into that, but it's wild that it's been 3 years since that all started. How crazy is that?
No, it's crazy, Ryan, because obviously you had a very significant date and moment in your life with the birth of your daughter. And I did as well with my marriage, know, and so our wedding, the last night of our wedding was March 7th. And I still remember that was sort of the last wedding before the week after. There was sort of a wedding that went to like 30% capacity. And then there were no weddings up until about 6 months ago, 5-6 months ago. So it's just crazy to think that it's been 3 years. And in many ways, it's sort of flown by. And in many ways, it just feels like a completely new era. I'm always going to kind of remember COVID, for a variety of reasons, obviously, in a global pandemic, but really as that very clear line between, say, like the first half and the second half of my life. There's just a very clear line where you can kind of draw an era, between the two. So crazy to think it's been 3 years. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess, and so it's been so much fun doing this with you, Ryan. So I guess it feels like it hasn't been that long.
Yeah, I know. I was at a networking event last night in Los Angeles here, and there's people I talked to that not first time going out, but it was like, and it was mine just for different reasons. I hadn't really done one before, but it was their first networking event since the pandemic, even though they'd done many, many before. So it's like, even still, there's some lag between some different things happening, but 3 years move crazy. But yes, my daughter's 3, doing great. Can't wait to celebrate with everyone. So today, though, we are going to talk a lot of USC. So if you're on podcasts, this will probably be a longer podcast, which is great for all you Trojans fans. Fight on. For radio, we're going to just kind of roll through some of the implications in college with some of the stuff that's happened with our Trojans and kind of see where it takes us. We'll do this real radio style, kind of live on the airwaves and see what happens. But show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. Use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Gets you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. What are we left with NBA, Jamal? Like, we only got 8 games, 4, 6 games, something like that.
Games. Yeah, it's about, depending on the team, it's anywhere between 6 to 7 games now. And so the jockeying for playoff positioning is very serious. And now with the advent of that play-in tournament, a lot more teams with a lot more on the line. I love it personally. So I think it's going to be a really fun time. We're sort of segueing now from March Madness. This weekend obviously is the ultimate weekend and the conclusion of that tournament. And then from this weekend, it starts segueing into the NBA playoffs, which then hopefully leads us into, the middle of the summer and then ultimately football being right around the corner.
Yeah. It's funny. And I'm not saying you feel like this way, but I feel like a large general of the public, casual fans, that March Madness, in a sense, kind of like loses its luster, even though it's championship weekend now. You have the Final Four and the championship, but it's like most casual fans care more about the round of 64, the round of 32, because there's 10 games on a day, all the sports betting and stuff like that. So I feel like a lot of people forget that there's still 2 games or 3 games to be played, which is funny. But yeah, and then we got opening day last night. Dodgers were in action. Random 7-10 first pitch opening night, which is strange. But and then hockey also only about 7 games left. So a lot of fun stuff to bet on at BetOnline. Tell them the guys at the LA Football Network sent you. Use the promo code BELIEVE for that 50% welcome bonus. All right, Jamal. So USC gets the big golden goose announced yesterday. 6'6" tight end out of Phoenix, Arizona, Duce Robinson commits to USC. We'll get all into it. I'll just say off the top, I mean, this is a huge win for SC considering just, how versatile and phenomenal this kid's going to be. And obviously with college rules, you're going to have 3 years of him essentially if he doesn't transfer. But also because they basically got Lake McCree, and that's about it at the tight end position. So, I mean, they needed a tight end on this roster to add some depth and some different stuff that they could do in Laken Riley's offense. So, your just thoughts when you got the news yesterday of this huge recruiting win for Lincoln Riley and the Trojans?
Well, Ryan, I mean, it's a huge day in USC football land. This is another landmark recruit in what is being called the quote-unquote Riley effect, which is very, very real. And Duce Robinson, you mentioned the 6'6", 215. He's got a 6'10" wingspan. The guy's an absolute beast. A lot of comparisons already to Kyle Pitts and other just sort of freak tight end athletes. He's a prolific 2-sport star, so we expect to see him on the diamond with the Trojans as well. And that was one of the factors that delayed his decision a little bit about where does football and baseball kind of come together in the hierarchy. And I think USC is a great spot for him to be able to pursue both dreams until he ultimately decides where he wants to move forward. 5-star. He's the only 5-star at his position, at the tight end position, Ryan. Number 1 player in Arizona, number 19 player overall. And now this gives USC 3 of the 5-star players on the West Coast in this class are with USC. And when you look at moving forward, obviously we're talking about the Tahj Washingtons and the Dorian Singers and the Brenden Rices. But when you now look at the cupboard of the future of USC at the skill position, it is absolutely frightening for not just the rest of the Pac-12 this year, but the rest of the Big Ten next year and in years to come. When you factor in now Duce Robinson with Makai Lemon, with Zachariah Branch, you're talking about 3 5-star mega athletes who are arguably the best or the second or the third best at their respective positions. And even beyond Caleb Williams with a signal caller like a Malachi Nelson. There's the other kid that they're recruiting, the 5-star Big Get. So this Riley effect is very, very real, Ryan. And we are on the cusp potentially of another Trojan dynasty, a la kind of the heyday of Pete Carroll in that 02 to 06 timeframe. And the landscape of college football could forever, at least in this next era, be changed with having that West Coast power again with USC. But kudos to Lincoln Riley. The year 2 now is going to bring a ton of expectations, but he has so much talent. USC is just going to overwhelm people with talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, on the micro level, just everything you said, just such a talented young kid that's going to come and bring some prowess. It's amazing to think as a tight end and this is no disrespect, but just when you look at the position, a tight end is the number one player in the entire state and number 19 in the country. That shows how talented he is, and he can probably play all over the place, kind of like a Kyle Pitts did at Florida. And we all know how good Kyle Pitts was at Florida, ended up getting drafted in the top 10 and in the draft, and was a very sought after, kind of seen as that hybrid wide receiver tight end guy. And at the macro level, you look at two things. A, just this particular recruit, USC beat out the likes of Georgia, Alabama, and Texas were his Final Four, which is pretty prolific in terms of football schools, especially in terms of Georgia and Alabama, who have, Georgia winning the last two natties, Alabama winning, obviously we know how many under Nick Saban, and Texas just being Texas. So being able to get that win and beat that out. But then two, when you look at even bigger than that, Jamal, and just 4 years ago, you look at two prolific quarterbacks in the state of California, CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, both opting to not go to SC and going to Ohio State and Alabama, respectively. I think those days are done. I think we can now say that obviously Malachi Nelson was the first domino, being Los Al, local kid staying home, his running mate at wide receiver and Lemon staying here as well. And UCLA might have something to say with that because they're getting some guys staying home as well. But I think we can finally, and with NIL and with social media and different aptitudes these kids now have, there's never going to be everyone staying, just because there is opportunities at other schools that, they'll chase. And maybe it's even starting jobs if you have too much talent on USC. But I think we're not going to see the creme de la creme of SoCal leave any often. I didn't even mention Oregon. Oregon's been plucking SoCal kids all throughout the Clay Helton era. So this, to me, starting with Malachi and now with this Duce signing, kind of signifies, I don't want to say the end, but a very strong and slow kind of burn to those top guys leaving SoCal, which I think is a huge, huge win.
Yeah, Ryan, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's all going to be on USC's terms now in terms of West Coast recruits, where USC's either going to get the guy they want, or the guy's not going to come to USC because USC didn't want them, or precisely what you said, where SC's so stacked that you want to go elsewhere for opportunity and shine and being able to produce both statistically as well as from a brand perspective. And Ryan, I think they have walled off potentially now the West Coast. I think this goes beyond just Orange County. This goes beyond Southern California. This goes beyond California. When you look at the fact that for this recruiting class and on this roster, they have now the number one player from the state of Arizona and the number one player from the state of Nevada, you're really looking now at a situation where this whole Southwest area is all going to be USC, and they've sort of forked that off as this is going to be on our terms. And I think that's been the greatest sort of strategic impact of the Riley era of being able to sort of fork this off. It really reminds me of those Miami heydays when they said, look, we're just going to fork off Florida, South Florida, as being our territory. That's the state of Miami, they used to call it. And so I think we're headed that way. And beyond just the brand and the history of USC, which I think is important, but I think those things are less and less important in today's world of instant gratification and these younger kids coming in. I mean, let's not forget the last time Reggie Bush put on a uniform was over 17 years ago. So that means that at the end of this upcoming season, nobody will have been born when the last time Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush wore a Trojan uniform. So, I mean, think about how staggering that is. So it's really less about the history now and really more about Lincoln Riley. And it's starting to show that this massive contract that the Trojan family gave Lincoln Riley, you can see it pay off. I'm not saying it's already paid off because it's too big a number and he hasn't won anything yet, but there is a path to seeing the return on the investment. And I think that's really what we're seeing here, because this is all about stringing together consecutive seasons of enduring success, and where success means college football playoff berth appearances, especially after next year when the CFP is going to expand to 12 teams. I mean, SC, it's got to be CFP or bust every year now moving forward when it's a top 12. And I think Riley's sort of setting up those expectations. So very, very exciting. Caleb is going to have all the toys to play with now as a reigning Heisman winner. And as great as we thought this offense was last year, I mean, on paper, they're much more frightening on paper, particularly skill positions, which is just a frightening proposition. They have even more talent than they did last year. Now it's just going to come down to gelling and chemistry, and our guys going to be okay with being second and third and fourth options when they're so decorated. I think that's going to be the challenge for Riley, is the mouths to feed. And I think if he can get these guys to buy in to a collective vision, there's nobody on the West Coast that's going to be able to hold this team to under 40 points. And then it's just going to come down to, again, Alex Grinch and that defense. But I think Riley's big challenge now, more than schematically, because I don't think the schematics matter as much as they did before, because you're just overwhelming teams with talent. You have talent advantages at every skill position. So the schematics are going to matter. But now Riley's also going to have to be kind of a master psychologist and a people coach to make sure that all the egos are bought in, because they've all been so decorated. They've all taken all of these iconic photos outside of the Coliseum and with the palm trees in Hollywood. And they've all been told how special they are and how they are uniquely going to change this program. He's probably told that to 20 guys. But the reality is not all 20 guys are going to be program changers. So how are they all going to now buy in and collectively mesh? Because I think the Sabans of the world and the Kirby Smarts of the world have done it so beautifully. But when you look at a Jimbo Fisher, for instance, Jimbo Fisher has littered Texas A&M with five-star talent the last 3, 4, 5 years, and they haven't had anything to show for it. So I think that talent is the first part, and now Riley kind of bringing it all together. Fortunately, he is the quarterback whisperer, and all the Heisman Trophy winners he's produced and the great NFL players he's produced over the last 6, 7 years, he's the right guy to do it. But now to see it all unfold is going to be really exciting.
Yeah, extremely. And we've talked about it a bunch this offseason. Is USC back? I think, absolutely is. They are back. And, it started last year, and now they can just keep building on that and reclaim, this West Coast as an entirety, but for specifically SoCal, which they've proven to do so much. And, it was painful, Jamal. And I know you being an alum, probably more painful seeing guys go to, Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State. Like, we get that, but seeing them go to Oregon, that's got to be come on, really seeing these guys from Centennial and Mater Dei and Bosco decide to go up to Eugene instead of staying right here with what we have at USC. So I think now this is reminiscent of that. So last thing about Duce Robinson, Jamal, and then we'll kind of move on to bigger picture and some stuff Nick Saban said, some coaching rankings I've seen out there and whatnot. And this will be perfect because this should wrap up this segment before we go to break. So you got about 2 minutes to answer. But coming in as a freshman, late recruit, obviously, committing late after National Signing Day and whatnot. Very thin at tight end position. I mean, how soon do you think we see Duce Robinson? Is he your day one starting tight end, or is it going to kind of be a little bit of mix of him and Lake McCree? Are they going to run a lot of, maybe no tight end sets while he gets acclimated? Kind of what's I'm putting you on the spot here, but just your anticipation of how quickly he'll get involved in this offense?
Oh, it'll be day one. There's just Lake McCree. I love him. I think he's a really talented player, but he's not Duce Robinson. And that talent discrepancy is going to reveal itself very, very quickly. Now, I think the question with Duce is going to be how Riley configures this team and what does the air raid look like in this form? Because I think this is going to be the ultimate laboratory experiment for the air raid. The air raid has always been about 4 and 5 receivers. It's always been about having a back also kind of serve as a receiver. It's never really used the tight end and the usage rate of the tight end being very high. And so how does he think about Duce Robinson is going to be the fascinating piece here. Does he think of Duce Robinson as just another hybrid weapon and another receiver that he's going to stack in formations as he would any big receiver, as he would have with a Drake London, as he would have with back in the day Mike Williams or a Marquise Lee or a Juju, one of these bigger guys? Or is he really going to tinker with the air raid a little bit and find unique niches to put Duce Robinson in? And so I think we saw sort of flashes of what a big tight end can do, particularly with Trigg a couple of years ago, and now he's transferred to Ole Miss. But I think the fascinating part for me is you've got this very dynamic chess piece on the board. It's a queen, it's a king, it's a bishop, it's a rook. It's sort of all of it put together. how does Riley find a spot for him on the field? Because talent-wise, he's already tight end number one. It's not even really close. But he's not competing with the other tight ends.
Yeah.
He's competing with the other receivers in terms of getting a spot on the field and getting touches and getting looks. So that, to me, is the deeper conversation of what Riley is looking for. And I think from all indications, the fact that he's a two-sport star as well, Ryan, he can process and absorb information very quickly. So I'm not worried about the playbook. It's now going to come down again to how Riley uses him and keeps him engaged. Another fascinating storyline going into spring ball.
Yeah, such a great point, just because of how great the receivers room. And last thing I'll sneak in before the break, it was so interesting at USC Pro Day last year, talked to Lake McCree, we talked to Malcolm Epps, and they talked about how they were really excited about this past season because the tight end was going to be much more involved than they were with Clay Helton. We didn't really see it that much come to fruition, mainly just because of how talented the wide receiver room. It wasn't really necessary. So now we'll see kind of how that does. And if we see a more Kyle Pitts type role where he's tight end, but almost more of a receiver. So taking a quick break here. We'll be back at the bottom of the hour here on radio. Keep right here. This is the LA Football Show. And welcome back to the LA Football Show here in the LA Football Network. We are live on the mightier 1090 ESPN Radio. I'm your co-host, Ryan Dowd. We're joined as always by the madman, Jamal Madney, back from the break, talking USC Trojans football. This is your Trojans huddle, talking about Duce Robinson, the big recruit. Now we're going to get into some kind of macro level stuff for this program and what it means nationally. Real quick though, Jamal, this is way off topic, but I'd be remiss. I know we talked a little bit in the first segment with Bet Online ad read about March Madness. This radio program does air live in San Diego. I know this is an LA show. Got to give a shout out though to San Diego State. San Diego State in the Final Four. Let's give a little hats off to them. I know there's probably extreme excitement down there to our friends and brothers and families, just, an hour and a half Southland in San Diego. So hats off to San Diego State. That's impressive.
No doubt about it, Ryan. I mean, first Final Four in program history. They should be so proud. It's been really an iconic run here in terms of how they were able to do this. In particular, their upset over the number one overall seed, Alabama, to then get to this road. It was absolutely tremendous how they played, and what a battle that game was with Creighton down to the final seconds. It was a very controversial call at the end there, but they are very well equipped to sort of cut down all the nets. I mean, they've got two really good guards that sort of can create their own shot. And then they've got a plethora of kind of tough big men. It's sort of old school basketball. They got some guys that are willing to, throw some elbows, get some rebounds, and a lot of skill down there. They got three big men in their rotation. And I know one guy, Mensu, I believe, is the defensive player of the year in their conference 2 years in a row. He just creates havoc defensively. But then they've got another couple big men that are quite skilled with that jump hook down in the block. I think the combination of two really good guards with those three really good bigs, I think they've got a chance to cut down all the nets, and really happy for them and really happy for the region. And I think this is tremendous momentum, truthfully, for the Pac-12 if they're able to close on San Diego State being a replacement team in the conference, to then be able to piggyback off of that success. And at least have, sort of a brand name with Arizona on the basketball side. And obviously they've perennially been really good in football. So really happy for San Diego State and Jeff Fisher and his now tree. They were the Fab Five, Michigan Fab Five coaching tree. And now, being able to kind of get that kind of success with Coach Dutcher, who was a 30-year assistant. And worked his way, paid his dues, and now is here. So it's just a great story all around, and really happy and excited for San Diego State.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely be pulling for them to win this thing out since, our Bruins are out, our Trojans are out. So we'll stick it with SoCal. And they're not really a rival considering currently out of conference in the Mountain West. And, they've been a good program for quite some time in basketball and football, like you mentioned. And so they would be definitely a smart replacement if that's the case. Into the Pac-12, which, would be the Pac-10, and maybe then it's the Pac-11 or goes back to the Pac-12. We'll see. Real quick story. I think I've told you this, Jamal, before. But so I went to Long Beach State, as many people know. No football team, but our big draw was basketball and obviously baseball with the Dirtbags, and really good volleyball, water polo, and stuff like that. But our basketball team plays at the Pyramid, which I still think is one of the coolest venues in all of America. For those who don't know, only 3 pyramids exist in America. It's the Bass Pro Shops in Memphis, which is super cool if you've never been, the Luxor in Vegas, and the Walter Pyramid at Long Beach State. So one of only 3. It's a beautiful blue icon in Southern California. Awesome venue. But anyway, so when I was there, I got to see 2 iconic games at the Pyramid because we would always play, and they still do. Dan Monson's still the head coach down there, and he schedules wild out-of-conference schedules just to kind of get this team on the map. Like, they play Duke, North Carolina, Pitt, all these big premier basketball schools every year. They usually get blown out. They play, obviously, UCLA and USC a lot. But it puts them on the map. They get some prime time. But whenever they play those games, almost always they are away because none of those big premier schools want to come to, a smaller venue and whatnot. We got North Carolina, I think, my senior year, which was still to this day the biggest crowd ever recorded at the Walter Pyramid. But 2 games we saw, Jamal, was Weber State was one of our homecoming games, I believe, freshman year when Dame was there. Damian Lillard was at Weber State, so I got to see him live before he was a star. And then our other homecoming game was against San Diego State when Kawhi Leonard was there. Wow. So we got to see San Diego State and Kawhi at the Pyramid. So that was our little rivalry with San Diego State. We played it obviously in the Big West and not even in the Mountain West, but it was a lot of fun.
Oh, for sure. And Kawhi in a lot of ways is the guy who put San Diego State on the map. They had that great team back in 2011, I want to say. They were 31-2 and yep. made a really deep run.
That was a year.
And they had a great team 3 years ago as well, and that was cut short because of COVID. And there was no tournament that year, so they've had a couple of teams that were on the cusp of the Final Four, and it's great to see this team finally do it. It's going to be wild. It's either going to be them or Florida Atlantic is going to be in the championship game because they play each other, and Florida Atlantic is the other kind of darling Cinderella story. So I'm definitely going to be pulling for that winner in the championship game, and so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, my bracket was a mess. The only Final Four team I got right was Miami, actually. That was my one correct pick, which I don't think anyone picked. So it's funny. I'm in all these bracket pools, and everyone's like, wow, Ryan literally got the most lowest seed correct in the Final Four, but everything else is abysmal. So I finished 20th. Didn't even matter.
I'd actually, Ryan, to be honest with you, I'd love to see FAU versus Miami in the championship.
That would be fun.
Just for that South Florida battle. I mean, that would be such a fun crowd in Houston. Just for that, I'm actually kind of pulling for that to be the final.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. So should be a fun tournament. The women's tournament has been awesome as well. Those are going to be some amazing games. So hope everyone enjoys. But all right, let's get back to some LA football talk. Talking SC right now. And let's get into, you brought it up beforehand, what Nick Saban said. And I'll just toss to you. You talk about what he said, when he said it, and then we can get into what it means and how important it is for USC football.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, he was interviewed earlier in the week and was sort of asked a question to the effect of, who's the team that you really kind of keep your eye on, or the team that you're maybe worried about, or, who are kind of your immediate threats that you feel like to this Alabama dynasty as it pertains to recruiting and making sure that you have top end talent. And I think everyone in the room expected him to say Georgia because of what transpired the last 2 years. But without hesitation, he went and said USC. Without question, what Lincoln Riley is building at USC is definitely where I've got my eye on. And I think it really just speaks to the respect factor that Saban has for Riley, but also the vision that Saban has in terms of what USC can be with a top-end coach. And when you compare Tuscaloosa or Athens to Los Angeles, and when you kind of compare the access to Hollywood and just the marketing opportunities and the business opportunities and the strength of the Trojan family and that alumni network, particularly in Southern California, and you sort of package all of that with the quarterback whisperer and Lincoln Riley and being on the West Coast and the weather, I mean, it is just a formidable combination of things that make it very attractive to young people and young, great athletes to want to come to. And so I thought that was really fascinating what Saban said. I think it speaks to, he kind of understands how Kirby Smart has built Georgia because Kirby Smart has used the Saban playbook. And I think people also forget that Saban was a little unlucky the last couple of years with injuries when going up against Georgia. So I think Saban feels kind of similarly in that regard and was like, I'm not that worried about Georgia. They've had a really nice run here, but we're going to battle it out, and I like my chips. But USC is just sort of this wild card and can do things that we just can't do. We can't compete with that city. We can't compete with that weather. We can't compete really with that alumni network when it pertains to things like entertainment and real estate. They're just things we can't compete with. So if they get the talent and sell it in this sort of holistic way, that's a hard package to beat. So fascinating to see the GOAT, Nick Saban, say that, really, in his infinite wisdom.
Yeah, and we talked about it in the first segment, but I think it just continues to compound and stress the level of where now SC is, that, you know, these top level recruits aren't going to leave anymore, because I think they realize how good it is here in LA and SoCal, and now that they can stay home and play for an actual elite coach and elite program and have the same, because that was the big thing, Jamal, right? Like after the Pete Carroll era, all during that time with all the litany of coaches that took over, not just Clay Helton, but it was like, okay, SC has everything I could ever need in terms of facilities and alumni and all this stuff. LA is a beautiful place, whether I grew up here or whether I'm from Utah or Arizona or Oregon or wherever, West Coast. Like, I want to go to LA, but I don't know if I'm going to win. And I could go to these other schools where I might not have the same. I have the same in facility, I have the same in maybe alumni, stuff like that. But I'm basically guaranteed to at least be in the conversation for a championship, or at least a conference championship every single year, where now that's finally over. And obviously he hasn't done it yet in year one, you know, lost in the Pac-12 title game, but I don't think anyone's going to argue that they will be in contention for championships every year. Whether they win or not, that needs to be played on the field, and we'll see. But there's no doubt they will be in contention, in conversation, in the rankings every single year that he will be here. And so if there's ever been a doubt in a recruit's mind if that was the one thing, which, you know, there's so many factors now with NIL and stuff, but if that was the one like seesaw they were going between, like if we're talking Bryce Young, for instance, that was thinking SC, and he's like, well, Alabama, I'm guaranteed to like play in the SEC championship. Well, now that seesaw now is dead even, because SC, regardless if they're in the Pac-12 or the Big Ten, I think they're pretty much guaranteed to be in the conversation for titles every year. So it's cool to see Saban say that. Is it, and I know you kind of alluded to it, but does it surprise you at all that he didn't flat out say Kirby Smart, his mentee, his Padawan, if you will, who's won 2 titles, who's taken guys from him? Does that surprise you, or do you think it's because he knows that they're kind of taking from the same pool, whereas SC now has a whole different pool that they used to be taking from that now is closing up?
Yeah, Ryan, I think that I don't think, you know, obviously he respects Kirby. It was his mentee, and obviously winning back-to-back national championships is a huge accomplishment. And I think we saw this year's Georgia is definitely a cut above. But I think you got to look at it in Saban's mind, where in 21, Alabama beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. They had the rematch. They barely lost that game without their 2 best receivers. I mean, if one of those 2 guys plays, Ryan, Alabama beats Georgia. I mean, just objectively. And Saban has another one, and Kirby doesn't have it. And then this year, I think, was more a case of a little bit of bad luck, again, with the Bryce Young injury. And I don't think Saban was particularly happy with his coordinators. And I think you've seen him now retool his coaching staff again. And all indications down there are that he's very happy with his coordinators now, and they're kind of aligned with what he wants to do. And so when you put that together with who Alabama is, and there was a video the other day of their, you know, $100 million plus new like football facility. I mean, that makes pro facilities blush. And so Alabama's reloading and bringing the artillery strong when it comes to facilities. So he knows that the combination of his gravitas with, you know, some of the cleaning up some of the coaching staff with the facilities and all of that, he's going to be able to outgun the folks in the SEC. The challenges are going to be out in the West Coast, which is a whole other ball of wax. And I think that's what makes things so exciting. And if you flip this onto the USC equation, Ryan, I think there's really only 2 existential threats to USC being a dynasty again and having a 6, 7, 8 year run like the Carroll days. One is making sure that not enough guys transfer out because there's just too many mouths to feed. And we've been seeing that all across not only college football, but college basketball. I mean, you know, North Carolina basketball, Ryan, is a great example. I mean, they've had some guys transfer where you're like, wow. I mean, they were just in the national title game last year as stars, and now they're transferring because they don't feel like they can compete. You see that on the USC basketball side. You know, Pac-12 Sixth Man of the Year Reese Dixon Water is just transferring right now. I mean, so it's kind of wild with these kids. If it doesn't go well for any reason, they're out. And so the probability that a Zachariah, a Makai, a Duce, and everybody's going to break out and be a star is probably slim. And so one or more of these guys is going to transfer at some point. So that's one where he can keep the right guys. He's got, because not every 5-star hits. Certainly it's a fraction of that. So making sure that he's keeping the right guys. And the second
let me just, before you get a second piece, because that's a great point, because what has made this Alabama dynasty so great, and this was obviously kind of predating this new transfer portal that we have, is all the guys that Saban recruits stayed the whole time. I mean, they're receivers from Julio Jones down to where they are today, the Jerry Jeudy's, all the amazing talent they've had, they don't leave. And they've had some of the stats. I mean, Henry Ruggs was wide receiver 3. He ended up being the first wide receiver taken in the draft, but he was wide receiver 3 on that team because there wasn't the same transfer thing. So it's a very great point that now that they have the transfer portal, yes, you have the benefit of bringing guys in, but now how do you keep those guys from leaving and saying, yeah, I'm cool with being wide receiver 4 because I want to win a natty and I don't care about being wide receiver 1 for a lesser team. So I just wanted to add that.
Exactly. No, it's a great point, Ryan. I mean, that same team that you talk about, Waddle was 4 on that team. I mean, think about Waddle couldn't even get on the field as a receiver, so they had made him a punt returner and a kickoff returner. And that's where he was really kind of getting the noise before then he transferred over into a more leading role. Would a guy like a Waddle have stayed if the transfer rules applied now? Probably not. So that's the other piece where, as fans, we have to sort of temper expectations where they're almost 2 stacked, right? And so when they are 2 stacked, truthfully. And so then it becomes a question of, there are going to be a third of the guys are going to leave because they all believe they're stars, but you got to make sure that the 2/3 that stay are the right 2/3. That the 1/3,
like Kyle Ford,
exactly, that they leave, shouldn't you pick the wrong horses. So that's, I think, threat number 1. Threat number 2 is Lincoln Riley. And does Lincoln Riley see himself as a Saban, as a guy who's going to be at a place for 10, 12, 14, 15 years and build a dynasty? Or is he going to follow the path of the Howard Schnellenbergers, the Jimmy Johnsons, the Butch Davises, the Steve Spurriers, the guys the Urban Meyers, the guys who all had a lot of success, but then ultimately the NFL called and they had to go make that plunge. And so that's, to me, the other piece where Lincoln Riley's stock is getting so high. He's, the likes of Hurts and Baker and Kyler, and he's the quarterback whisperer, and now Caleb. How long is he willing to sort of invest in USC before that itch for the NFL becomes a little bit too tough to scratch? I mean, I've said this now for about a year, Ryan. I think that if that Cowboys job opens up and Mike McCarthy flames out, which I fully believe he will in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, a guy from West Texas gets the opportunity to coach the Dallas Cowboys, that might be just too difficult to say no to, and to say no to Jerry Jones and be the guy that resurrects them. So that's the other existential threat. He's almost too young to just commit long-term to a school. Because even Saban went and dipped his toes in the NFL for 2 years with the Dolphins, realized, hey, I don't have the personality for this, came back and now has parked himself. But all those guys, make that plunge to the NFL before they realize what they really want. And Riley, being so young, hasn't made that plunge yet. And so that plunge is the other existential threat. That does he leave in a year or 2 years or 3 years and maybe cuts short this dynasty of what it could be, a la the likes of, the 2000 Miamis, the Floridas with Spurrier and Urban Meyer. And there's just so many teams that when you go down the list in the history of college football where they say, hey, if our coach just stayed and if the system just stayed, we could have won so many national championships. And so does SC follow that path? That's the other one that I'm watchful for.
Totally. And we've talked a lot about that. And the more I think about it, the more and this is just hypothetical, or not even hypothetical, just my opinion, but I kind of have the belief that he won't leave till he wins at least one natty. Because then if he leaves and goes to the pros, his college coaching days will basically be seen as you were a good quarterback coach, essentially, but never won anything. So I think he won't leave till he wins one, but who's to say, what if they win one next year? He's like, all right, I don't know if he'll stay for a dynasty. I hope he does, because I think it's such a great fit at SC, and it's such a perfect unison. And like everything we just talked about, how they can be a dynasty and all this and that. And, Saban, I believe you would know the years better, but I think he left LSU to Miami pretty much right after winning a natty, saying, okay, I got my natty in college. Now I can go to the pros, and then realize, I'd rather go to college. And obviously he's became the GOAT of college football. So last point on this, we'll take a break, and then I want to do some more kind of coaching rankings, Pac-12 versus SEC. We can have some fun with it, do both USC and UCLA crossover. I know Trojan and Bruin fans will love that, but we'll have some fun with it. So you got like a minute here. Going back to Saban, Oklahoma's joining the SEC in 2025, I believe. So the year after SC is going to the Big Ten. Had Lincoln Riley stayed there, he would have been then in the same conference. Do you think, in your opinion, Saban, and you got I should have given you more time on this, and we can do more after the break if we need to. Do you think Saban would have preferred Riley to be in his own conference and in his own backyard where he has more watchful eyes? Or do you think it's more of a threat him being on the West Coast?
Definitely more of a threat being him on the West Coast, because I think that Riley, if you bring in the next Lane Kiffin as your offensive coordinator, if you're Saban, you get a lot of that cachet of being able to produce talent to take it to the next level. But you sort of own this region, and Alabama is still the top dog in the South, and obviously with Cole with Georgia now. But that brand and that region, you're always going to be alpha. What Lincoln Riley is doing is he's building a separate empire on completely different terms in a region that Saban doesn't have as much access to. And so I think that's why he said USC. He would not have said Oklahoma if Lincoln Riley was at Oklahoma coming to the SEC. He said USC because of what Riley is building there, because he sees that convergence of factors in a really deep way.
Yep, totally agree. So perfect timing. We'll do another quick break. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Keep it right here. This is the LA Football Show. Welcome back to the LA Football Show here on the LA Football Network, LAFBnetwork.com, your destination for Los Angeles football. We are live on the Mightier 1090 ESPN Radio. Happy Friday to all out there. Hopefully you're enjoying this sunshine leading up into the weekend. For Jamal Madney, I am Ryan Dowd. We've been talking all SC today with the big Duce Robinson commitment, with some chatter about Lincoln Riley and USC being the true threat to the Alabama dynasty and Georgia dynasty that has now begun. And now we want to kind of talk crossover with SC and UCLA in terms of coaching rankings. And Jamal, so we'll start with this. On3, great recruiting website for those that haven't checked it out. Our guy Scott Schrader is a writer there, does awesome work. But they just came out with their Pac-12 coaching rankings. And so I'd love to kind of talk through these and see where we don't have to re-rank all 12. That would probably take too much time, but just kind of see how they did. So Jamal, what do you think? Should I read through all 12? Should we go through like three at a time?
Let's read through all 12 and then we can jump from there. I love that.
Okay. I will go 12 to 1 because you can never start with 1. So 12, Kenny Dillingham, new coach of Arizona State, former OC for Oregon. Number 11, Troy Taylor at Stanford. Number 10, Jed Fish, Arizona. Was a little surprised by that, but we'll get into it. Number 9, Justin Wilcox of Cal. Number 8, Jake Dickert of Washington State. 7, Deion Sanders, Colorado. Number 6, our guy, Chip Kelly, UCLA. Number 5, Dan Lanning at Oregon. Number 4, co-Pac-12 Coach of the Year, Jonathan Smith, Oregon State. Number 3, other co-Pac-12 Coach of the Year, Kalen DeBoer out of Washington. Number 2, kind of the legend, if you will, of the Pac-12, Kyle Whittingham of Utah. And number 1 in our hearts and in the rankings, Lincoln Riley of USC. So initially, Jamal, just your thoughts of the overall rankings, and we can get into it coach by coach if we want to.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, I think I would sort of call that maybe 80-85% accurate. I think there's a couple that I think they got it right for the most part. I think they had a couple misses, but I think those misses were pretty significant. Like the error on those misses was pretty high, but I agree with probably 9 out of those 12 spots overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think just everything you said, overall good. I have, let's just get into it. So who would you have? I don't know how we want to do this. Who would you have as, it sounds disrespectful, but who would you have as last in the Pac-12 right now? Well, and here's what I'll say too. Here's what I'll say too before we get into it.
Yeah. I mean, go for it.
You go. Sorry.
The way I would go about this, Ryan, is, my top six. I think there's a top six, and then there's a next six in the Pac-12. I think that's pretty clear. To me, it is Riley is the best coach in the Pac-12, no question about it, for his ability to recruit, his ability to develop quarterbacks, the offensive mind that he is, and now the artillery that he has in terms of resources. I do think Kyle Whittingham at number 2 is absolutely appropriate, given what he's been able to build at Utah, given some of the limitations that he has at Utah, budgetary, geographic, cultural, and how he's been able to build Utah as a perennial power. I do love where they've got DeBoer and Smith at 3 and 4. I actually agree with that. I think what DeBoer has done at Washington last year was absolutely staggering, inheriting. We forget the mess that was the University of Washington after Chris Peterson retired, and the whole Jimmy Lake saga, and just where they were as a program for a couple of years here post-COVID. And that just seems like such a distant memory with DeBoer, and how he is able to take Michael Penix Jr., who was sort of languishing in Indiana for a couple of years after he left Indiana, and now has turned him into one of the top 3, 4, 5 NFL prospects for next year's draft. And then you see what Jonathan Smith has done with Oregon State. Our good buddy Will Decker on the network often talks about Oregon State in this upcoming year being this year's version of Utah. I think that Oregon State is going to be one of those teams that is seriously contending for the Pac-12 title. And what he's been able to build on the offensive line at the running back position, and now adding DJ Uliungalale with that sort of great defense and the scheme that they run, I think having him at 4 is right spot on. To me, Chip is at 5 for everything that he's been able to do at UCLA with the transfer portal, and win, year over year, have a greater number of wins than he's had the year before, and the winning percentage going up every year that he's been there. And I think the best is yet to come, and I think the big spike is yet to come. And I have Chip slightly below DeBoer and Jonathan Smith because he hasn't been able to get that Pac-12 Coach of the Year kind of big year yet. But he's right there nipping on those guys' heels. And I fully expect Chip long-term to be a top 3 perennial coach in the Pac-12 over many, many years to come. And then I think number 6 is Jedd Fisch. I think that having Jedd Fisch at 10 was an egregious oversight by On3. And I think everything that he's built, when you look at where they were and what, 2 years ago with 1 win and what he's had to inherit, and now he's sort of created a tremendous culture. The challenge for Fisch is that these guys do really well, and then they get plucked to bigger programs. So he's got to be able to sort of create that consistency where then the guys who break out then want to stay at Arizona. But I think just everything that he brings to the table in terms of his mind, his personality, he's also got an aura as a recruiter. I love where he is. And then I think it's sort of a next 6. And then you can sort of argue 6 through 12, 7 through 12, I should say. And that I think is more incremental. One guy's 7 is one girl's 11 and vice versa. But I think that's my top 6 pretty clearly.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I for sure Lincoln Riley 1. You probably the only people that would argue that would be Utah fans, just because it's only been 1 year. But I think everyone that knows coaching knows how great Lincoln Riley is. Everything we've talked about for the past 40 minutes on recruiting, bringing USC back, kind of cornering the West Coast market, all the great stuff he's done already, the culture that he's brought back to SC, the game day experience that we've talked a lot about that he's at least providing on the field. Now it's about the university providing it off the field, which, hey, maybe LAFB can help. Give us a call. We got some ideas. So Lincoln Riley to me is clearly 1. I actually, number 2, agree. Not actually, but yes, I agree. Kyle Whittingham, everything he's built at Utah, back-to-back Pac-12 champs. You can't, argue with that in terms of having him any lower than 2. That would just be straight up disrespectful with what he's built there and the players, and not necessarily a prowess in recruiting, whether that's him not being a great recruiter or just whether it's just really hard to recruit at Utah. But he takes those 2, 3, and 4-star recruits and makes them play at a 5-star level. So you can't take anything away from that. Number 3, I would actually put Jonathan Smith right here, mainly just because of the more proven what he's built. Yes. And that's nothing against Kellen DeBoer, but only 1 year so far at Washington. Turned that program around. Everything you said, amazing. I love Kellen DeBoer. Met him really quickly at the Pac-12 Media Day, and coming from what he did at Fresno and then being at Washington, I think he's gonna. And he won, co-Pac-12 Coach of the Year with Jonathan Smith, and I think he'll probably end up becoming, once Kyle Whittingham steps away, that top 2 or 3 coach in my mind. But right now, I have Smith at 3 just because he's been at Oregon State since 2018. That program has not been anything perennial about it for a long, long time. And he's really built them into a slowly, similar to what Chip Kelly's done, right? Slowly, they've gotten better year in and year out. They've shown some flashes, but never put it all together. And then last year was kind of the first year we were like, this is a truly formidable team on defense and on offense. I mean, that running game rivaled Chip Kelly's in terms of just great running from multiple different backs and quarterbacks. The defense, obviously, we saw what they did against Caleb Williams and USC up there in Corvallis, a stadium of only 37,000 people, and it's maybe the hardest Pac-12 stadium to play in outside of Provo, or outside of Salt Lake City, excuse me. So I think just the fact that he's been there longer and had to build something from nothing is why I have him at 3. Kellen DeBoer at 4. Everything you said, turn that program around, but he still has a lot more resources at Washington. Got to transfer in like Penix Jr., which obviously helps out. Obviously, he had something to do with that, so I'm not taking anything away, but that's just why I have that flipped. At 5, I agree. Chip Kelly at 5 for me. I know the wins and losses are basically 500 now because it's been a slow build, but he basically tore that program down to the studs and rebuilt it. This was not a Les Snead, Sean McVay remodel in 2023. This was a complete overhaul and tear down to the studs, start with a true freshman quarterback that had basically played no snaps when he came in, DTR, that is, as a freshman, turn the offensive line into an offensive line unit that gets drafted high every year. The running game has been impeccable. The culture is back. The pride in the program is back. It's a place where pro athletes and media and entertainers want to come and hang out in Westwood again because of what they've brought to that program, and the recruiting has gotten better, and the transfers, obviously, we know with Dante Moore, they're on the rise again. And then at number 6, I probably would agree with you. Jedd Fisch, I cannot believe they had Jedd Fisch all the way down to 10. I mean, that's just shot. And I know his year 1, they won 1 game, but last year we saw the transformation in just 2 years, how it went from how bad it was with it was what, Kevin Sumlin before him, correct? That took over. Was it Sumlin before Fisch?
Yeah,
how bad it was at the end of Sumlin's career to then essentially doing like a Chip Kelly complete rebuild in year 1, only winning 1 game. And then last year having some signature wins, going blow for blow with USC down in the desert, overtaking UCLA and what was arguably the worst loss for UCLA, but it wasn't because Arizona was necessarily a bad team, just the record didn't match up. Has brought in some nice recruits. So I'm shocked they have him down at 10. Maybe it's just because the records don't dictate and they're just looking at records, and Dan Lanning in year 1, with the likes of his quarterback, was able to do things. But I think the last thing I'll say about these top 6, I think Dan Lanning losing Dillingham, his OC, who is ranked 12th because he just hasn't coached yet, I think that's going to be a bigger story than many are saying, seeing as Dan Lanning's a true defensive guy. So our top 6 are in agreement. I just have Smith and DeBoer flopped.
No, I love that, Ryan. And I think that the only sort of quote unquote controversial omission here would be Dan Lanning because of the brand that is Oregon. But I would argue precisely what you just said with Dillingham's departure. How effective is he going to be? And then, truth be told, I thought the end of the season was pretty poor game management from the standpoint of Dan Lanning at Oregon.
Real bad.
You look at the way they lost that game at home against Utah, that opened the door for Utah to get back into the Pac-12 conference championship conversation. When you look at the way they collapsed at Oregon State, I mean, going for it on 4th down on their own side of the field, their own 20. I mean, there were just some game management decisions there, whether it was going for it, whether it was time score situation and making appropriate run pass choices, whether it was time management, whether it was timeout management, was very, very questionable at the end of that year. And so for me, I need to see more from Dan Lanning before, he has an opportunity to break into the top 6. So that's really where I came from on the Dan Lanning piece. And then I think the other wild card, you mentioned it, Ryan, is prime time. Neon Deion, Coach Prime.
We just don't know.
What is he going to do at Colorado? We don't know. Obviously, nobody can talk a game the way Deion can. If college football was played in press conferences, Colorado would be Alabama. There's no question about that. Deion knows how to inspire a crowd, get the media pumped up, just oozing charisma in a way that few can, not just in sports, but in entertainment and politics, etc. But how is his coaching style, but more importantly, schematically, his strategy, how he puts his personnel together, how he puts his coaching staff together year over year, how is that going to hold up in a top flight conference? And I think that's going to be the fascinating element there, because Deion, in a lot of ways, Ryan, a lot of the elements that we talk about Lincoln Riley has, Deion kind of has. You know, when you talk about his ability to recruit, his ability to talk about his resume and what he's been able to do at the highest of levels. And then when you look where Colorado is situated, how beautiful Boulder is, you and I are both huge fans. My wife is a very proud alum. She did her master's there, absolutely loves it. We go there every year for a weekend. You know, the beauty of Colorado and Boulder, and when you sort of stack it up against those neighboring states of Nebraska, of Missouri, and you know, Colorado's in that very unique position where they're on the border of that Southwest and the Midwest. Yep. And, you know, there's a whole 5, 6, 7 neighboring states where you could say Colorado's the most beautiful place to play of all of those states. And you can wall off your own little region there and bring in big Midwestern offensive linemen and kind of build a power running game the way Jim Harbaugh did with his charisma. There's a potential sleeping giant there in Colorado. So it's going to be fascinating to see how Colorado evolves, especially with the departure of USC and UCLA in the Pac-12. And sort of there's a void there to really be held of who's going to rival Oregon and Washington for Pac-12 supremacy. And I think Deion has a great chance to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's too early, obviously, to say. I mean, going from where he was coaching before at Jackson State to now in the Pac-12 and whatnot. But I would not be shocked at all if with SC and UCLA gone, that Colorado takes over as the premier program in the Pac-12, even over the likes of Oregon and Washington, Oregon State now, which you can say and whatnot. So we have to see it first. But hey, if that it's becoming like a reality show almost down in Colorado and Boulder with the press conferences and you see in the meeting rooms and the way he's kind of putting stuff out, which I think it's smart that he's doing it because he's putting Colorado on the map. I mean, they've been such a forgotten program for so many years. I mean, as many know, I grew up in Colorado, in kind of Colorado's heyday as a kid back in the Mike McCarthy era. And then after the McCarthy era, it became a mess with scandal and stuff like that. But they were still like a sought after program just because of the history that was built, similar to kind of SC after the Pete Carroll days. It was a mess, but it was still a mainstream public university. And then now it's just kind of been forgotten. You know, Mel Tucker came for a year, looked like they were starting to bring it back, and then he left, and we had they had a few down years after that. So they're finally back in terms of not even playing a down under Deion, but just the culture he's creating. And it's like, it's fun TV, it's fun social media. So we'll see what that translates to now on the field, actually, and what can happen. But I think right now it's 7, 8, 9. Honestly, you could probably put him at 11 just because we haven't seen any performance on the field yet. Whereas the other guys, you know, just have him. And I'm a big proponent of when I do like, we've talked about this a lot. When we do like rookie rankings in the NFL, like specifically quarterbacks, like I will never put a rookie above a vet just because they haven't played yet. Like I don't care if you're the number 1 overall pick, you're ranked 30th in the NFL because you haven't played it down yet. So I'd be fine with having Deion 11, Dillingham 12, just because we haven't seen them coach a head coach game in the Pac-12 yet. But so here's what I want to do, Jamal, if you're cool, and we'll have to take a break here in a minute, but we'll just spill it on over. So for the last about 25 minutes of the program here, we just went through the Pac-12 rankings, at least for sure, 1 through 6. And so we don't have to do it 12 versus 12 or whatever. But I'd love to now compare the top 6 guys, at least, maybe top 7, top 8, to the likes of the SEC and to the likes of the Big Ten, where UCLA and SC will be going. So let's start SEC, and then we'll end with the Big Ten, since that's where our teams will actually be playing. And we got, just a couple of minutes here to start. But On3 did rankings for all conferences. So let me read you the SC rankings here, Jamal, and then we can start to see where they would stack up. So starting from 14, we got Zach Arnett, Mississippi State. 13, Eli Drinkwitz, Missouri. 12, Clark Lee, Vanderbilt. 11, Billy Napier, Florida. 10, Sam Pittman, Arkansas. 9, Hugh Freeze, Auburn, new hire. Number 8, Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M. Number 7, Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss. Number 6, Shane Beamer, South Carolina. Number 5, Mark Stoops, Kentucky. Number 4, Josh Heupel, Tennessee. Number 3, Brian Kelly, LSU. Number 2, Nick Saban, Alabama. And number 1, Kirby Smart, Georgia. So just read you a lot of names. And so let's just do this since we're already up against, you got like 2 minutes or so. How do you feel about those top 6? And then we can compare our Pac-12 top 6. You want me to read them again to you, or you got them?
No, I'm good. Ryan, I think for me, I think they got closer with the SEC. I think there were maybe a couple of misses, but I think you could tweak, hey, 5 should have been 7, 8 should have been 4. It was a little bit closer than some of the omissions with the Pac-12. For me, my top 6 in the SEC, I know Kirby Smart is king of the hill right now the last 2 years, but I still got to go with Saban just for the body of work. And to me, Saban is 1. Kirby Smart is nipping on his heels at 2. I don't think there's really any argument of who the top 2 is. And, there's probably debate of who's 1 and who's 2, but I think that's your top 2. I think number 3, for what he's done and what he's built to start with, I got Josh Heupel. And for me, I think Heupel at Tennessee has been far more impressive in terms of what I've seen and just how he's revived that program. And I think with his innovative offensive mind, I think he's going to be able to really provide sustained success there. 4, I like Brian Kelly at LSU. And I think there's going to be some really interesting evolutions there with Brian Kelly. 5, I'm going to go Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. I think, you can't really discard the fact that Ole Miss now is being thought of every year as a perennial 9-10 win team. And how many times have we thought of Ole Miss in that way? There was that one great year they had with Hugh Freeze, and it's great to see Hugh Freeze back in the SEC from Liberty, now back to Auburn. But Lane Kiffin, I think the combination of his X's and O's ability with his ability to recruit, I think keeps him in the top 5. And I think he just got to, sometimes with Kiffin, he's just got to stay out of his own way with some boneheaded things that he says and does. And then 6 to me is Beamer at South Carolina. What he's been able to do at South Carolina is just so impressive. And I see a huge trajectory there. And then I think Stoops at 7 is fair. But I think that was a little bit of a flash in the pan last year with Kentucky. I think that was a little bit of an anomaly. But to me, Beamer is firmly there at 6. And that's my top 6 in the SEC.
Love it. Yeah. Quick turnaround for the Gamecocks with Beamer, and Stoops will get his old OC back, Liam Cohen, who took a year off with the Rams. So we'll see how that goes. So quick break here. Will be a final segment where we'll compare our Pac-12 coaches to the SEC, and the Big Ten. This is the LA Football Show. We'll be right back. All right. Welcome back to the LA Football Show here in the LA Football Network. LAFBnetwork.com. We are live on the Mightier 1090 ESPN Radio, talking all things college football, all college football today. Jamal, I know this is your wheelhouse. You love it. I love it too. It's been a lot of fun. Surprisingly, here we are at the very end of March 31st, the final day, and yet we have some things to talk about with college football, which is great. USC's spring day right around the corner at the Collie. I think April 15th at noon. I will be there. UCLA spring practices open to the public for the first time that I can remember. So go and enjoy that beautiful Westwood campus, Drake Stadium down there, and watch our guys in blue perform and play and get a glimpse of Dante Moore and Chip Kelly. Right now, though, we're talking all coaches, Jamal, and we just wrapped up last segment. We went through the Pac-12 rankings, agree or disagree. And then now we're comparing those rankings or those coaches to the SEC and the Big Ten. We're going to end with, since that's where USC and UCLA will be going. So just to recap really quickly, if you remember, you just listed your top 6 in the SEC, which I'll just say I agree with. I don't think I would omit or change anything in that. So just real quickly, just for those that are maybe just tuning in, just give me the names of the top 6, and then we're going to compare Pac-12 to SEC.
So top 6 in the SEC for me will go Saban, then Smart, then Heupel, then Kelly, then Kiffin, then Beamer.
Perfect. So we're just going to do it like this. We're going to go 6 versus 6, 5 versus 5, and then we can do an overarching which 6 are better after we do that, and then we'll move on to the Big Ten. So you had, you just said it, but you had Shane Beamer at 6, correct? South Carolina?
Yeah.
And then we both had Jedd Fisch, I believe, at 6 in the Pac-12,
Right.
correct? So
Yeah.
Fisch versus Beamer. Who are you taking? Both 2 years in.
Yeah.
Beamer obviously has had more success in terms of wins at South Carolina, quicker turnaround. Jedd Fisch, I would argue, probably took over a worse program when he got there and has taken a little bit more time to maybe get in the win column. But we both are very high on him. We think Arizona is going to be kind of that sleeping giant this year that no one's talking about. Who are you going with? Beamer or
Right,
Fisch?
this is a tough one. I mean, way to make it tough to kick things off. I got to give the slightest of edges to Beamer. And
Yeah.
I think that just with what he's been able to do, not just turning South Carolina around, but also just the infusion of energy. There's an optimism, there's a vibe, there's a clarity to the future of South Carolina in a way that I have not seen for many, many years. And I think the other element for me that puts it over the top is how he was able to take Spencer Rattler to the next level. I mean, let's not forget, Rattler was a Lincoln Riley recruit, played under Lincoln at OU, really was thought of as kind of Caleb Williams before Caleb Williams. And it just completely kind of crashed and burned. It didn't really play out the way we had anticipated in anywhere close to what our expectations were. He takes kind of Rattler, who's sort of damaged goods in sort of the recruiting world, ends up quarterbacking South Carolina to really a tremendous season and huge upsets and big wins over the course of that season. So for those reasons, I got Beamer edging out our man in Arizona.
I agree, but I don't know why when you just said for those reasons. I've been watching a lot of Shark Tank clips, and so like, for those reasons, I'm out.
Okay.
Really. But no, for those reasons, I agree with you. I think we both agree. We're really excited about, I mean, maybe not excited because of they're playing SC and UCLA, but really excited about what Jedd Fisch is building down in Arizona. Just really bright mind, obviously has some UCLA roots, has some NFL roots, and he kind of brings that in infusion down to Tucson, what he can, build down there. I think he's doing some good things, but I think just the success Beamer has already had in the SEC with the likes of Spencer Rattler, as you mentioned, the infusion of excitement and culture change, similar to what Lincoln Riley's done at USC. I think I would go with Beamer over him as well. So 5, you had Kirby Smart, correct?
5, I had
not Kirby. No. Lane Kiffin.
I mean, you're going to get me shot in the South here, Ryan.
Oh man, no. I'm looking at the sheet and the name I had in front of me was Kirby Smart. I knew that you had him as 2. So okay, Lane at 5, and I think we both had Chip Kelly at 5. So same question to you. Lane Kiffin is obviously the kind of the offensive protege, if you will, the wild card in terms of social media and recruiting history at SC, getting fired on the tarmac, has made Ole Miss, though, relevant again. Our guys, Jackson Dart now, quarterback down there, formerly of the Trojans. And then you got Chip Kelly, who we talk about ad nauseum. We love him here in LA, has brought UCLA back to prominence, even though it's taken him probably longer than most people wanted, but he's done it the right way, doing a complete rebuild. And now I think that program is back in contention yet again. So I probably know where you're going with this, but maybe you'll surprise me. Chip Kelly versus Lane Kiffin.
So Ryan, I think for me here, it's Chip Kelly, and not because I'm a UCLA alum and any of those things, but there's really 2 primary reasons. One is you have to sort of look at the body of work over the course of a career, and you cannot discard what Chip Kelly was able to do at Oregon, and now how he's able to break in and really rebuild UCLA from scratch. Lane Kiffin obviously had a couple nice years with USC. Had a really good year with Ole Miss there when they went to the Sugar Bowl that year and won the Sugar Bowl, I believe. So that was a great feather in his cap. But I think the overall body of work for Chip, that area under the curve, is greater than for Lane Kiffin. But the second reason I think is even more compelling, Ryan, and for all of Lane Kiffin's antics and his brand and his pedigree and all of the things that sort of makes him famous, he's yet to recruit a great quarterback at Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. So far it's all, the USC transfers and Dart, and he's getting guys in, and he's getting guys in from other programs. And the one big knock of Chip is he can't recruit, and Chip was able to recruit Dante Moore to UCLA. Yep. And Dante said it was because of the conversations with Chip. I believed I could go to the next level talking with Chip, and I just sort of fell in love with everything that he had to say. So that, that knock of Chip not being able to recruit, I think is a false one. I think it's a lazy argument, and he's shown that for the right type of kid, he can be as charismatic as anyone, but he's got to believe in the kid. And I think for those two elements, I won't say for those two reasons, for those two elements, I've got Chip Kelly over Lane Kiffin.
Love it. Love it. I agree. I have nothing against Lane Kiffin. I think he's a lot of fun. I think he's good for college football in a way. He's kind of like the archangel of college football, but he has a feeling in terms of narratives that everyone just like wants him to be successful, with him actually never really being successful.
Right.
Everyone is like, oh, Lane Kiffin can do all this, do that, do this. And it's like, well, we never like actually see it come to fruition. Whereas Chip Kelly has been successful, obviously at Oregon in those days, and now has brought UCLA back from where they were in the bottom to back to now prominence, and had a real shot last year at a potential Pac-12 Rose Bowl. And we'll see what they do this year. So I won't talk a lot on it because we're going to run out of time, but I agree. Chip Kelly, I would take over Lane Kiffin. So 4s, we'll go with your list. So you had Jonathan.
Well, let's go with yours, right? We'll go with yours. We'll go with your list.
So Kellen DeBoer at 4?
Yeah, we'll do Kellen DeBoer at 4.
Kellen DeBoer at 4 versus Brian Kelly at 4. This is interesting now because you got Brian Kelly, who's the established, made Notre Dame a national, well, Notre Dame's always a national prominence, but really brought Notre Dame to 2 or 3 college football playoffs, couple natties, obviously got blown out of them, but they made it there. There's always the debate of are they a real team, or because not a real team, but are they truly deserving of that, or because they play a softer schedule and they don't have to play like a title game? Is it fair? But anyway, he did all that. Now he's at LSU, started off a little rocky, but then made LSU kind of back to where they were in that national championship days, versus Kellen DeBoer brought Washington back, but it's only been 1 year. So who are you going with?
Yeah, Ryan, this is a tough one, but I'm going to have to go with Brian Kelly. And I think that just obviously you mentioned the 2 CFP appearances at Notre Dame, the national title game appearance with Notre Dame against Alabama. And it still feels like he's finding himself at LSU and scratching the surface, and he still found a way to get double-digit wins at LSU. And so I think if you ask me this question 3 years from now, the way DeBoer's trajectory is going, I think we could have a really interesting debate on our hands, and I could potentially flip that. But the fact that DeBoer on major college football stage as a head coach, incredible year last year, I completely agree with you. But again, to your point of why you had him 4 instead of 3 with Jonathan Smith, it's only been 1 year. I just think the overall body of work with Brian Kelly is significantly more. Again, if we talk about this in the offseason of 2025 or 2026, we could be having a very different conversation. But in the offseason of 2023, I got to go with Brian Kelly.
Yep. I agree with you for basically everything you said. I love Kellen DeBoer. I really, really do like that hire for Washington. I think he was the perfect man for the job, and is, I think it's good UCLA and USC are leaving, because I think they'll have a lot more problems with Washington than they'll have with many of the teams in the Big Ten, which we're going to transfer over here in a minute. But Brian Kelly is the body of work, what he's built already, and where he brought LSU after a rocky start. You got to go with him just because of the resume so far. So 3s. Now this is going to be interesting, and I'm really curious your thoughts. Jonathan Smith, Oregon State head coach for us at 3 in the Pac-12, and then Tennessee head coach. Josh Heupel. Thank you. Josh Heupel, who's done some amazing things, brought Tennessee back from where they've been in a long time. So who are you going with, Heupel or Smith?
This one's the hardest one.
Yeah.
And on this list, this is the hardest one on this list. And obviously Heupel, what a year he had with Tennessee last year, and the way they just thumped Clemson too in the bowl game and just finished it so strong. But he had some things to work with. And Jonathan Smith, inherited a very, very difficult job and has sort of built that program from scratch in a way that has been really compelling. He still hasn't quite had that signature win, that signature season yet, but he's done it over time. Oh, man, I am, this is really hard.
Yeah. Similar kind of vibes as coaches too, like a little under the radar.
Vibes as coaches. I love Heupel's sort of innovation to the SEC, and I think him beating Alabama. I think the year, even though it was just 1 year versus I think a greater body of work, I think that year was so good for Heupel relative to not having the signature win that by the thinnest of margins, I'm going to go Heupel. But if we're talking about check back with me in 3 years for the conversation before in terms of Kelly and DeBoer, check back with me in 12 months for the conversation here, depending on how this season goes. But I think at this very moment, by the thinnest of margins, I got to go Heupel.
Yeah, it's so close. I could go either way. I'll just take the other side of the coin. I'll go Smith, just simply because of what you said in the beginning, what they had to work with. Tennessee has not been good for quite some time, but it's still Tennessee. I mean, it's still Rocky Top. It's still Knoxville. It's still 110,000 people in that stadium. It's still a very, very passionate college town and fan. I mean, Knoxville is one of the great college towns of America, and they live for that program. And not any disrespect to Corvallis, who obviously is very prideful about Oregon State, but it's just they don't have the resources Tennessee has. They don't have the facilities Tennessee has. I mean, their stadium seats 32,000 people. 70,000 less than, or 80,000 less than Knoxville. And I think still what Jonathan Smith has built with those resources, and not necessarily the Alabama type win, but they did beat Oregon coming from behind this year in that amazing end of the season game, finished 17th overall in the AP rankings. So for those reasons, I'll go with Jonathan Smith.
Love it.
But it's close.
Love it. It's close.
All right, final two here. Yes, final two. I think we probably, no disrespect to Whittingham, but we can probably be pretty quick on this. Kirby Smart versus Kyle Whittingham.
Kirby Smart. I mean, this is sort of a no-brainer. No disrespect to Kyle Whittingham, but I think Kyle Whittingham has also peaked at Utah. This is what Utah is. In down years for USC, down years for Oregon, they'll skate by with 3 losses, win the Pac-12, and then lose in a marquee bowl game. That's Utah. And for better or for worse, and Utah fans are probably going to come after me on social media, it is what it is. I mean, the last 2 years has kind of shown that. They lost in the Rose Bowl. They've had some bad luck with Cam Rising getting hurt, but this team's ceiling is those A-plus blue blood programs have to be at a B minus level. And Utah still is going to lose 3 games in the regular season and win a very parity-like, conference, win the conference championship, and then lose in the bowl game. Versus a Kirby Smart, who's now in a potential to win a 3rd straight national championship. I think it's my ultimate respect for Saban and what he's done in terms of body of work. But over the last 2 years, Kirby Smart has been the best coach in college football. So this one is probably the easiest out of the 6. If the last one was the toughest, this one was the easiest. Kirby Smart all the way.
Yep, totally agree. Love Kyle Whittingham. He's built something amazing with Utah, and they're competitive and obviously have won the Pac-12 last 2 years. But Kirby's won the Natty 2 years in a row, so you got to go with Kirby. Number ones probably skews one way, but it is close, and especially when you look at the future of college football. But right now we're just talking heading into the 2023 season. Lincoln Riley, our USC head coach, versus Nick Saban of Alabama. Who you taking?
You know what this reminds me of a little bit, Ryan? It reminds me back in the day when Nike did their puppets. You remember the most valuable puppets with Kobe and LeBron?
I do.
And, it was Kobe had all the rings, right? I mean, in 2011, Kobe had all the rings. It was 5-0 Kobe, right? I mean, and it was sort of what could LeBron be? What could LeBron be? And then obviously now LeBron's at 4 rings over the course of the year, and it's, this great cultural debate. I know folks love LeBron over Kobe. Other folks love Kobe over LeBron, but it's like that. And I see sort of a similar situation between Saban and Lincoln potentially here. Right now, this is 2011. Saban's got all the rings. This is not close right now. I mean, at this particular point in time. But I think both of what we're trying to say is, look, let's extrapolate this out. And if Riley has the foresight and the vision to want to stay and build something over a decade at SC the way Saban has done at Alabama, let's check back in 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and this could be just an incredible debate to have moving forward. And so I see this as an MVP, most valuable puppets of college football moving forward, as the established GOAT and a guy who has all the resources and the personality and the mind to kind of be the next GOAT or the next threat to the GOAT if he sort of plays it right. But for right now, it is King Saban, no question about it. But I love where the narrative is going. And I think it speaks to Saban's foresight of not picking the number 2 guy in his own conference, but picking this guy as his biggest threat.
Exactly. He knows what's coming. As long as Lincoln stays for a decade at SC, we could be seeing a very different, or at least a close conversation. But for now, is Nick Saban. So, of course, we took too much time on the SEC. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit for this Big Ten, how we do it, Jamal, because we got about 3 minutes, of course, left, 3.5, 4 minutes left. So instead of going through all 6 Pac-12 versus all 6 Big Ten, let's just take SC and UCLA, who are going to be going to this conference in a year, and let's just go number 6 in the Big Ten. Would you take Chip or Lincoln Riley? Which I think mostly we're going to take Lincoln Riley probably over everyone, but let's see where Chip stacks up, and we'll just go through that way. Sound good?
Sure, let's do it.
So based on 3, these are not our rankings. Number 6 in the Big Ten currently, they have Brett Bielema of Illinois. Obviously, he had a lot of time and tenure in the SEC as well. So who are you taking? Are you taking Brett Bielema, or are you taking Chip or Lincoln?
Oh, I'm taking Chip. Absolutely. I mean, Ryan, let's go through the 6 in the Big Ten, and then let's just see where Lincoln and Chip would stack up.
Okay, that's a better way to do it. So Brett Bielema 6, 5, Kirk Ferentz at Iowa. I mean, one of the longest tenured coaches in college football at the same program. Number 4, James Franklin, Penn State. Number 3, remember the new addition, Luke Fickell from Cincinnati, now to Wisconsin, once seen as a top candidate for the Trojans. Number 2, Ryan Day, Ohio State. And number 1, Jim Harbaugh, Michigan. So let's start with Chip. Where would you fit Chip in within those 6?
Ryan, I would actually have Chip at 6 after slotting Riley in at 1. I mean, I got Riley, I got Riley 1, Harbaugh 2, Ryan Day 3, Franklin 4, Fickell 5, Chip 6. That's how I would stack it in the Big Ten moving forward. And, let's see how it all shakes out, because I think Harbaugh's had a tremendous amount of success the last 2 years of bringing Michigan to the college football playoff. But you just feel like, it's tearing at the seams a little bit. Every year he's flirting with the NFL. Every year he's been talking about how his personality doesn't work with this new college football of entitlement and nil and transfer portal. And you just feel like this isn't a long-term play. Like, this is going to end fairly quickly, whether it's a year or 2 years. I think Ryan Day then it's going to be the battle with Ryan Day and Lincoln for, sort of Big Ten supremacy. And we've always talked about that whole USC Ohio State rivalry that'll take place in the Big Ten. And then I think, having the likes of Fickell and James Franklin, I think those guys are kind of the next tier that are going to sort of battle it out. And I think Chip is nipping at those guys' heels. In the years that Ohio State, USC, and Michigan, maybe there's a slot open. Yeah, you're going to be thinking about Fickell at Wisconsin, James Franklin at Penn State, and Chip Kelly at UCLA as those sort of next in line to make that Big Ten championship game. So that's where I would have it as Lincoln 1, Chip 6, and these guys in the middle.
I completely agree. That's exactly how I would do it. I think, Lincoln, even just on resume, has proven just as much, if not more, than Harbaugh and Day, dating back to obviously his Oklahoma days. Like, none of them have won a natty, right? Ryan Day, it was Urban when they won it. So none have won a natty. They've all won titles for their own conference and been in the playoff, but haven't been able to win it. So very even, but I would take Lincoln over Harbaugh and Ryan Day. And I totally agree. I think Chip slides in right after James Franklin. And I think that's a very good spot. And I think he can honestly exceed that and become better, because Franklin, again, as great as a coach, James Franklin, another guy that some SC people wanted, but he's kind of, I want to say, been given the benefit, because obviously Penn State's had a lot of issues off the field and stuff he's had to deal with, and bringing that program back from some dark days. But he's kind of been blessed with the Big Ten, honestly, being very weak for a long time. And he's kind of just been able to skate by as the 3rd or 4th best team in the conference, just because there's not been a lot of other competition. So he's just been skating the coattails of like, well, if I'm 3rd best in the Big Ten, I'm automatically a top 25 program. So I think he's benefited from that. And then I would actually put on 3, has him way down. I put PJ Fleck right after. I put Fleck above Bielema and Ferentz at Iowa, because I think Fleck is a really good coach coming from, in the, Central Western Michigan over to Minnesota now. So anyway, that is all the time we got. This has been a fun college edition of the LA Football Show. A lot of SC talk, a lot of UCLA talk. Thank you all so much for tuning in. For Jamal Madney, I'm Ryan Darrett. Everyone have a great weekend. We'll be back next week. We're doing our live shows on Monday, 6 to 8. Make sure to tune in on all of our YouTubes and LAFBnetwork.com. Talk to you guys later.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.